So I always love coming up on the stage at a fitness convention because I know everyone is evaluating my walk, my gait, my balance, and my posture. And now I'm wondering whether Evan is looking at my butt, whether I'm clenching it or not. So just one more thing to think about. Great to be here. We're going to talk about brain health and hiking. It seems disconnected, but it's not. But first, remember yesterday that Billy Crystal, Jack Palance scene from City Slickers? You got to find your one thing. I was lucky. I found my one thing when I was about 17. My one thing was I'm really good and I really like walking uphill with a heavy pack on my back. So when I was about 18, my father said to me, "That's great, as long as you want to be a Sherpa in Nepal. So you better find something else to do." And I did. I went into corporate marketing, which led me to fitness, which 25 years later leads me here talking about brain health with you guys. And I got to get the clicker out, don't I? I've got some stuff to share. And I've got a simple question first. Which is better? The pumped up muscular brain or the dried out piece of cauliflower brain? Kind of looks like a muscle, doesn't it? And this is going to be a recurring theme. And I view the brain as a muscle. Others do as well. And you can train it. And we have figured out at my company ways to stimulate the brain, hopefully to create neurogenesis. And the byproduct is really astounding, actually, and we'll talk about that. But this is where the story begins. I was literally on this spot. It's near the top of Mount Washington, 1992 in New Hampshire. It's about 3.5 miles from the trailhead. It's a very rugged uphill climb around rock and ice, sometimes in the winter. And I was on the way down, and I caught a character bounding up the hill. I'm telling you, like we call it trail running now. That term didn't exist, but this guy was trail running with ski poles. And as he came closer, I said, wait a second. He's got gray hair. And he got even closer, and I went, he's like 80. And he came up to me, and he stopped, and he said, "Hey, young man." I think I was like 35 at the time. I said, "How are you doing this? This is incredible." He said, "Well, I've done this 3 times a week for the last 30 years. And for me, this is how I spend my time. I live right across the street. I run up to the top of Mount Washington, and I run back down." And he goes past me. And I was blown away. But then it hit me. Maybe hiking is the fountain of youth. And that just stayed with me for a really long time. I've been hiking for that long. And now, 30 years later, I can tell you why that is, because science has caught up with what that guy knew. So I'm sure you've seen some of the research, some of the stories. Being lazy can literally shrink your brain. Did you know that an obese person's brain is 8% smaller than a lean person's brain? That's because fat actually eats your brain cells. Fat cells are human cells, right? They need nutrients, they need oxygen, they need blood. And that comes from, it's a trade-off. It goes there instead of your brain. Now I'm starting to see scientists find hiking do incredible things to the brain. And it's all starting to fall into place. So here's the basis of it. Now, you learned about this a little bit yesterday. This keeps coming back. Neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is the process of creating new brain cells. Do you remember a generation ago, you always heard from your science teacher, you're born with a finite number of brain cells, there's nothing you can do about it, and as you age, they go away. If you have a drink, you're killing brain cells? Not true. You can build new brain cells at any age. It was recently a secret on how to do it, but it's not a secret anymore. Under the right conditions, at any age, your body can regenerate brain cells. And those right conditions are increasing blood flow and oxygen to the brain, better known here as exercise. So we're going to talk about that kind of exercise. Now, spent a lot of time yesterday learning about neuroplasticity, building new neural pathways. That's a byproduct of neurogenesis. When you create those new brain cells, they have to be put to good use. They get put to good use in a neural pathway. The neural pathway is an alignment of brain cells that control your body. Every complicated muscular movement involves a neural pathway. These new cells need to be stimulated. The more you stimulate them, the better the neural pathways. And the more neural pathways, the denser your brain becomes with neural pathways. As you can see on the left, that's not too dense. But all the way on the right, that's a person who has got very dense neural pathways. What that does is it creates a situation for you called cognitive reserve. Cognitive reserve is kind of like to a muscle, extra strength. It's backup. And it makes you resistant to stroke. It makes you resistant to dementia. And hopefully, science will show that it makes you resistant to Alzheimer's. So building dense neural pathways becomes a very viable fitness objective. That's what my company has figured out how to do. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So again, complex bodily movements create neural pathways. The more you rehearse, the more you practice, the denser and the more powerful those neural pathways are. A tennis serve, very complicated, but the only way to get good at it is to do it about 500 times a day for 10 years. A golf swing. Tiger Woods' once perfect golf swing, that was honed through repetition and the creation of neural pathways that were cemented in his brain. And on. Any kind of complex motor behavior, including learning to play the piano. Learning to play the piano is a very complicated thing. It uses a lot of different functions of your brain. The more you play the piano, the more dense your neural pathways are. And MRIs of piano players have shown that to be the case. I'm not sure they've ever MRI'd a tennis pro who was also a piano player, but I bet they have very dense neural pathways. And that's the key. It's all about neural pathways. Now, somebody this morning said Fitbit just counts steps, steps don't matter. And in a way that's correct, because there are 2,000 steps per mile. How you use those 2,000 steps matters. 99% of the walking we do is on automatic pilot. Your brain isn't even being used. You know how to do it. You're just walking. And also, when you're on a treadmill, it's automatic pilot. You are not thinking. You're not engaged. And so as a result, yeah, you're getting a cardiovascular workout, and it's better than sitting on the couch. But for me, I prefer the concept of random experiences in walking. And for me, that turns into hiking. Think about this. In 2,000 steps of rugged terrain, every single step is uncertain. You have to know if you're on level ground. You have to know if it's going to slip. You have to know if you're going uphill or downhill. And it forces your brain to make minute calculations over and over. You're not on an automatic pilot. And if you haven't done it, I'm sure some of you have, if you've gone on a long hike, you can feel your brain working. You are alert. You are sharp. You get off a treadmill, you're just tired. So for me, using those 2,000 steps uphill is a powerful brain exercise. It builds a stronger brain. It builds neural pathways. And that's why I've liked to do it for so much. I didn't know, I didn't have the science for it, but this is what's happening. But here's the secret. Within your body, you have the ability to create the foundational element of neuroplasticity. You've always had it. We all have it. It's called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. It's a hormone in your blood. The hormone is triggered through exercise, any kind. Aerobic is great. Anaerobic is also great. Any kind of exercise that elevates your heart rate to 60 to 75% of max on a repeated basis. So you've heard the high-intensity interval workout. Well, that is exactly what it's doing for a person above 50, the older you are. It is charging your bloodstream with BDNF. That BDNF flows through the bloodstream, gets into your head. When it stays there, and it's being triggered by practicing things like that create neuroplasticity, it stays there. And it creates more robust brain cells, a nice, plump, active, healthy brain. So that's why I like the Fitbit and those devices, because they also now track heart rate. To me, it's all about the heart rate, and especially heart rate variability, the up and down, up and down, up and down. That's actually a hike I did recently, and it was about 7 hours long, and I was 13 minutes in peak, which means I was a little too close to max, but 1 hour and 11 minutes in that zone of cardio where I was right about 60 to 75%, but in peaks and valleys. The peaks and valleys are good things. Not only does that trigger BDNF, but it gives you a strong heart. The heart rate variability is a very important dynamic. And they've shown that having a really wide range of heart rate variability is actually optimal. If your resting heart rate is 60 and your max heart rate is 170, that's a person who's probably not gonna have a heart attack. If your resting heart rate is 80 and your max heart rate is 110, that's a risk. That person's heart doesn't have a lot of flexibility. So what I love about hiking is it really puts demands on your heart, and it builds BDNF. So, Stairmaster is the uphill version of treadmill. It's a nice thing. It burns extra calories, it's a little harder. You're walking uphill, engages more muscles. But let's look at the calorie burn. A flat treadmill, 170 calories per hour. To the max of a treadmill is about a 15% incline. You'll burn about 450 calories an hour. You can see the difference. The steeper you get, the more calories you burn. Obviously, then the heart rate works harder. The heart works harder. Now, this picture is a friend of mine. He's on a 45-degree incline. 15% incline is 450 calories. 45-degree incline, you're going to burn about 1,000 calories an hour. This guy's got a backpack on, so he's carrying an extra 30 pounds. It's an incredible workout, and it's using not only the legs and the core, but it's engaging your balance, it's keeping your heart going. That's why I like it so much. But the other thing that's so cool about it is you're outdoors. You know how few people actually spend time outdoors these days? And not only does it reduce your stress and it makes your immune system stronger, but strangely enough, if you haven't been outside for a while, the first time you're outside and you look into the horizon 20 miles away, your eyes are actually a muscle that's focusing in a way that it hasn't focused for a while. So you're exercising your eyes. That's a good thing. So there's a lot of benefits here. But I also want to talk about something you probably don't realize. Most people think hiking downhill is easy. Well, it can be if it's gentle. It can be easier. It's not as cardio stressful. But the weird thing is it's actually 3 times more, it uses 3 times more energy because what's happening is you're fighting gravity. Especially if you have a pack on your back, you're walking downhill, you're engaging different muscles in a different way, and you're trying to decelerate gravity so you don't just go plummeting down. So fighting gravity is a great way to use a completely different set of muscles. But what's most interesting to me about downhill is that it requires, because you don't want to fall. And when you're going downhill, you can see down. When you're going uphill, it's not as scary because you can't fall up. But when you're walking down, you can see where you can fall. It requires greater focus. And it requires an emphasis on balance. That's another critical element that hiking will give people, and that's a critical element of functional fitness, which engages new neural pathways. It's a totally different exercise. So if you go uphill for 4 hours and downhill for 3, the downhill for 3 it's engaging something completely different. But here's something I like. We hear all about hand-eye coordination in sports. Hiking requires foot-eye coordination, which I personally think is more important for functional fitness because we're creatures of walking. We don't walk on our hands. None of us are going to be playing Major League Baseball anytime soon. I like the idea of foot-eye coordination. And when you're walking downhill, you don't always have to walk downhill a knife-edge ridge on Mount Katahdin. That's extreme. But you are very careful where you're placing your feet. That process is building neural pathways, okay? Which I think is critical to fall prevention. As you know, if you're more agile, your senses are sharper, your body has better reaction times, you are not as susceptible to falling. And that's the key thing, because as you know, fall is a critical thing with an older population. So being able to resist the The deterioration of neural pathways that control balance is a really important thing, and that's another reason why I like this. The thing I like the most, though, is the concept of self-efficacy, and I'll use another term, confidence. I have seen this for years. You introduce someone to hiking, just as you introduce them to anything, and they go through a gradual progression of being scared to do it, afraid of the outdoors, afraid they can't do it, and maybe you start them off on a flat woodland walk. That's great. But the progression is really cool, and as you see people get more confident, that confidence turns into confidence in everything. It gives them the feeling that they are in control of their destiny. And so being able to progress from flat woodland walking to steep uphill rugged terrain, yeah, it's not for everybody, but you don't have to walk the Franconia Ridge to feel that way. You can walk a smaller thing. Getting to the top of something is a finite, measurable way of achievement that you often don't get. So even walking to the top of a minor hill is an accomplishment for a lot of people, and it gives them a feeling of confidence. And that's what I love about fitness and I love about hiking. It's a phenomenal thing, and I've seen it for decades. It's one of the reasons I'm addicted to it. And by the way, this picture on the left reminds me, we talk about the concept of compressed morbidity. I know a guy, knew, who at age 88 hiked to the top of that mountain. That's Mount Lafayette in New Hampshire. It's about 5 hours from the road to get to that point. Hard to do in your 80s. He sat down on a rock not far from there, and he died. Now, that's compressed morbidity because he was able to get himself there, and then his body just gave out. So it sounds like a sad thing, but it would have been better if he was 95, but I'm telling you, that's how I want to go. Except I want it to be in that spot when I'm 105, get to that point and just give out. Without having been sick, without having spent 10 years in a wheelchair, without having created hundreds of thousands of dollars in bills for artificial hips and all kinds of medication, the compressed morbidity thing is really good. And again, that comes right back to the fountain of youth. I think hiking is the fountain of youth. If you have a chance to recommend being outdoors and going uphill to your clients, I recommend it. I think it's a phenomenal brain fitness exercise and a phenomenal functional fitness exercise that transfers into every part of your life. So I couldn't recommend it any more highly. If I can leave you with one important concept, it's this. New cells and networks of the brain grow as needed. Basically, it's a muscle. Just as muscles grow with exercise, you use it or you lose it. If you understand how movement creates neural pathways and heart rate makes it work really better, you should program that into your efforts. And that's exactly why most people who join fitness clubs don't get any effort. They don't get their heart rate up enough. They're not working it right. So that's why coaches are important. That's why trainers are important. Keep people on that path. The new era of neuroscience says the brain is a muscle. Dr. John Ratey is kind of the guru. He's got 2 great books I also recommend. One is Spark, which is the first one to connect brain health with exercise. The other is Go Wild, which is get outdoors. We are basically animals, and we're made to move outdoors. So the more you send people outdoors, the better. I'm a huge fan of that. And that's kind of it. Now, here's the thing. I got this company. We've been working on it as a think tank for a while. Our mission is to radically improve the trajectory of aging. Hiking is just one way, but we've got a patented process that creates neurogenesis. It's exercise and a lot of other things built into a science-based process. We've been trying to launch for a while. We're almost ready. We're going to start connecting small studios. But the thing that we've learned through trial programs and through doing this ourselves for 4 years of playing around with it is that for the audience over 50, if you put the brain first, the body follows. And it's a hook, because as you've heard repeatedly, people above 50, above 60, above 70, one of their greatest fears is that the brain gives out before the body gives out. So in order to make the brain span as long as the lifespan, put the brain first, the body will follow. Our clientele doesn't necessarily want to run a triathlon or to be Mr. Olympia. We want to live longer, live healthier, and live better. And that's what we do. That's where we're headed. So I love to engage. Please connect with me on Twitter or Facebook. I think we have to engage as a community. I think if you tweet what Dan talked about, FAI Summit 2017, you promote what Functional Aging Institute is doing, which is a good thing. And if we all engage and keep interacting, this all gets better because it's kind of a movement now. And if we all move in the same direction, we can fundamentally change the fitness business. And here's the change I think is going to happen. It's one of the missions of my company. Fitness is often disrespected as being a low-grade business. I think the future is to reinvent it and have it be thought of as upstream preventive healthcare. Not fitness, but part of the healthcare equation. Because the only way to really solve the healthcare problem is to prevent people from getting sick in the first place. You cut out cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and dementia, you've changed the economic equation of the United States. And I think 20 years from now, hopefully more people are doing it, but that's where we have to go. And that's where it starts here at the Functional Aging Institute, and why Cody and Dan and I have hooked up. So that's what I got for you. Thank you.